as I look at what I'm going to start with here, I realize it doesn't sound quite as noble as what Michael had described. Maybe it's a little earthier, but I think that's okay. I mean, God made us out of dust, and to dust we shall return. So we're of this earth, and we're human beings, and so I think it's worth asking why do we talk about stewardship? And I think one reason is because we want to live forever. Plato said men have children so that they can be immortal. Folks want buildings and bridges named after them. No one wants to be forgotten. Or what was life for? We want to live forever. I think, we originally had that instinct in us before original sin. So that's why I want to talk about stewardship, because I think the first component of becoming immortal is to love the Lord with all our hearts, and good stewardship helps us do that. The second component of becoming immortal is loving our neighbor, and good stewardship helps us do that too. One reason I wrote the book on money is that God's given me a lot of blessings, and the last thing I want to do is be an idiot and blow it. When you get blessings, the idea that you would blow it, and the fact is He's blessed you all too, and I don't want you to blow it, because I'm pretty convinced of this. For those of us who have some material resources, and compared to the third world, most of us are pretty wealthy, but everybody has some material resources that God's blessed them with. At the end of our lives, I think we're going to get some version of the following question, and that is, that money I gave you? What'd you do with it? Did you use it to draw you and your loved ones closer to me? Because otherwise, I'm kind of disappointed in you. Now, I want us to all consider a question as we dive into the stewardship issue. And I don't need a show of hands on this one. How many of you own slaves? Okay, good. I hope I don't see any. How many of you own your children? How many of you own your spouse? Treat them as chattel or property. I hope no one. But how many of us act as if we own our own lives, as if they're our property to do with as we please? The world actually tells us that our lives and our money are ours to do with as we please. You know what people always say to me when I'm thinking about money or not spending it on this or that? Say, it's your money. You can do whatever you want with it. But as I accumulated some money, I sensed that worldview might not be correct. And so I started studying how wealth manifests itself. I started collecting data and observations about wealth. And here are a few of the observations I found. First, we've all heard there's no such thing as a free lunch. But look around. I mean, the earth and the things in it, they're the ultimate free lunch. There's a priest, Germain Grisey, who says nothing in creation ever comes to be with a label saying this good is meant for this person and not that person, this group not that, people of this sort but not that sort. In the beginning and now, God provides all the riches of the material world for all people to use as He directs. In other words, the goods of the earth, the free lunch, they have a universal destination. They're meant for each and every one of us. When we judge that they're ours alone to do with as we please, we're like the banker who gets so used to having the money of a wealthy depositor in the vault that the money almost starts seeming like it's his own, not the depositor's. Now, when a banker starts thinking he owns the money in the vault, the real owner of the money has problems. And when we start thinking that simply and absolutely we own the blessings that we've been given, then the poor and the needy have some real problems. But if God gave the fruits of the earth to all of mankind, how in the world did private ownership of property arise? And how can it be justified? Michael did a good job of talking about how it's reflected both in the Bible and in our Judeo-Christian history. All of the flourishing human societies have allowed private ownership of property because, as he said, the best of them promote it and protect it. Because experience has shown that private ownership is usually the best way to draw from the earth the maximum benefit from the most people. And St. Thomas Aquinas talked about this, as Michael indicated. It makes society wealthier and more harmonious because it creates incentives for owners to treat their goods better and to bring forth from them greater wealth than there would otherwise be. So that's the benefit of private property that's so overlooked by so many who denounce it as selfish and seek to abolish it in favor of the poor. Notably, Pope Benedict, in his last encyclical, said that the market, and I'm like you, Michael, I don't really use capitalism, but I think the market is something to be defended. Pope Benedict said the market is, quote, the economic institution that permits encounter between persons, end quote. Isn't that beautiful? So that's the market, and we have private property, but morally speaking, my money's not meant merely for myself. Now, for many of us, arriving at that intellectual, theoretical conclusion, most people will kind of sort of agree with that. That's actually the easy part. We struggle, however, to determine just what this truth means for us at this time in our lives while we're still actively involved creating and saving and growing in our careers and our businesses. But I've found this. If we're not careful with our money, it can wreak havoc. Now, this is not new news, but I've tried to dig a little deeper than many who've reached the same conclusion and to be more specific. I go into more depth on this in my book, but just to give you a quick overview and see if I go over these things that money can do if they ring true with your own experience. First, money can threaten those we love. Handled properly, money improves many things that it touches, providing fundamentals to those in need, bringing transportation and health and music and beauty to a world that without money would have great difficulty gathering the resources to undertake grand projects. But we all know when misused, money can seriously damage those who receive it, particularly when those people are young and come into wealth before their characters have been formed in diligence and virtue. We've all seen that money can stifle initiative. Helen Keller reminds us that character cannot be developed in ease and quiet. Only through experience of trial and suffering can the soul be strengthened, ambition inspired, and success achieved. Money can work against our humility and gratitude. We start to expect the things that money can purchase as our God-given rights. Money can threaten our identities. There's an old Yiddish proverb that says, "With money in your pocket, you are wise and you are handsome and you sing well too." The fact that others may treat us differently because of money can lead to an initial period of elation that then is overcome by fear and a sense of isolation and finally cynicism. For those of you who go out to people who have money to get their donation, you need to remember not to treat them as an instrumentality of money and donation, because that's how they're often approached. Money can lead to quick fixes. To those who suddenly acquire it, it can seem that money can solve almost any problem without their having to exercise patience or humility or perform the difficult acts of sacrificial love that actually bind together strong and loving communities. Money can bring with it irrational guilt. Money can distract us. Having more than one choice, there was a guy, Arthur wrote a great book called The Paradox of Choice a few years ago. Yeah, having more than one choice generally improves our lives. But as the number of choices multiply, the psychologists have seen our lives actually grow more difficult and more stressful as we struggle to weigh the benefits of one item against the not quite parallel benefits of 20 or 30 almost identical other items. That's as my father used to say, that's kind of a high-class problem, right? When you have the money to buy these things. But it's interesting how, if we're not careful with our money, how it can actually lead to more stress. It can increase our frustration. I haven't seen, because I haven't been to Sioux Falls very long. Do y'all have Waffle Houses up here? You know, a Waffle. Anyway, it's like a little diner. They're in the South everywhere. And everybody eats at Waffle House all the time. But it's, $4 for eggs. So if I go to the Waffle House and I order my eggs and my bacon and my toast and coffee, and they bring it 7 or 8 minutes later and the bacon's not there, I figure it's kind of par for the course. I mean, it's the Waffle House and they don't always get everything right. Sometimes I stay in nice hotels in New York and I'll order room service, and I'll order eggs and bacon and toast and coffee. And the bill ends up being, $50 or $60 because of the way it rolls up for room service. Now, they forget the bacon, okay? I'm irate. Same experience. Waffle House, they forget the bacon. Hotel, they forget the bacon. But what's interesting is how when you're spending a lot of money, how much more agitation you get with the same problem. It's incredible, the law of rising expectations. The more we expect from something, the more vulnerable we are to disappointment and unhappiness. But having said all this, let me reiterate something I said earlier today. Money's good. It facilitates the transfer of goods and services. It increases the interdependence that human beings have on one another. It can be used wonderfully and effectively as a tool to do God's will. So what would God have us do with our money? I think God wants us to use our wealth to grow closer to Him and to help those we love grow closer to Him and help others in their spiritual and corporal needs. That's why we have money. On the one hand, given what I've just said and the other things that have been said today, that might sound a little obvious. But do we really act in that manner with our money? How do we execute on that idea? We know doing the wrong things with money can mess us up or those we love. One time I was talking to a guy who was pretty wealthy, and I was saying, you could do this with your money. This is when I was in the midst of writing the book, and I was interviewing people and talking. And I said, somehow I compared one alternative with money to burning it. And he said, actually, Frank, burning it would be better than that alternative. It's what Michael said, the idea that if you spend money in some way, it's always going to be a good thing. Sometimes you'd actually be better off burning it. And that realization that sometimes, rather than do something bad with it, you'd be better off burning it, which I've never burned any money. But the idea that there might actually be a better alternative to that really got me thinking. So it stands to reason, if we use it correctly, though, we can be happier than we are now. However happy you are now, right now, in this moment, if you start using your money more effectively, my claim is you can be even happier. I think everyone in the universe wants to be happy. I've never met anyone who said, I could stand to be a little less happy. And so I think step one on this path to happiness is following the first vocation or calling that we have with our money, and that's to use it to grow in virtue. The way we use our material resources is related to our vocation. In his encyclical on the economy, Pope Benedict specifically used the language of vocation in speaking of economic matters. As we seek to follow, each of us has a different vocation. As we seek to follow it and grow in virtue, first thing we do, we follow the first plank of the Hippocratic Oath, right? First, do no harm. When it comes to material wealth, we got to really be careful not to act foolishly. And I'm not talking about if you got millions. I'm talking about at any level. The foolish things we do for a temporary, fix of what's the hormone that you get a shot of when you do dopamine? Yeah, a little shot of dopamine, and then it fades away. So the first thing we got to do is not use it foolishly. But after that, the second vocation, especially for each of us in business, there's a vocation to create wealth. Not everybody is supposed to give up their day job and go work at the parish. Some of you have given up your day jobs and you work at the parish. And that's great, because that may be your vocation. But not everybody's supposed to do that. In his World Message for Peace in 2009, Pope Benedict, and by the way, this was not reported by the New York Times, as you might imagine, Pope Benedict said, wealth creation therefore becomes an inescapable duty which must be kept in mind if the fight against material poverty is to be effective in the long term. That's the Pope of the Holy Roman Church saying that wealth creation is an inescapable duty. So if you're involved in a business as an owner or a critical manager or worker in a business that's creating wealth, which means it's creating value for other people, okay? Seek your vocation in that. Keep in mind, that's a good thing. That's part of what Pope Benedict is speaking of here. The creation of wealth can be a vocation, and it's part of our stewardship. And so as long as we can continue to create wealth efficiently, we have a bit of an obligation to do so. Not just so our own assets can increase, but so that through our efforts, others may obtain the fundamentals of life, and we may help serve the universal destination of goods, which is what the Catholic Church teaches. This is an important thing. The third vocation of those with wealth is giving some of it away. And we all have some. The widow had her mite that she was able to, we all have some we could give away. Giving some now, it's much easier. You know, there was Buffett and Gates and some others were kind of made famous for this billionaires pledge. And so they've gotten a bunch of billionaires to sign up to say they'll give away half their wealth. And that's a good thing. I mean, there's a variety of arguments. Let's assume that's a good thing. But what's interesting is the number of them who are going to give it away when they die. Because if you'll put in your will that I'm going to give away half my money, let's say I'm worth $5 billion and I'm going to give away $2.5 billion, when I die, you get credit for having signed the giving pledge. I don't think that cuts it. You know, say I'll give away money that I don't even need now, I certainly won't need when I die, and I'll give it away then. Giving now saves those who can't afford to wait until tomorrow. Giving now keeps money from being misused in the variety of ways I discussed earlier. Giving now forms us in virtue by teaching us detachment and generosity. And giving now helps us to be happy. Now, I make that last claim, but it's not just a sentimentality. A buddy of mine named Arthur Brooks is president of a think tank in Washington, and he studies and writes about happiness. One of the things he's found in his studies is that those who give generously are happier. The sociological and the psychological data actually support that statement. Let's dive into why that's the case. I want to challenge you with a premise. I want you to consider for a moment that the only way to be happy in this life is to be philanthropic. The only way. Now, my statement that the only way we can be happy is to be philanthropic begs a few questions. First, what do we mean by happy? And second, what do we mean by philanthropic? Let's answer the second one first. What do we mean by the word philanthropic? Because unfortunately, it's become known as something that's affiliated with the Rockefellers or the Carnegies or the Gates of the world. The word philanthropy comes from two words, philos, which we talked about earlier, love of, and anthropos, which is man. I use the word in the broadest sense possible because I think a lot of people in the church like to use the word caritas or charity, and that's very important, and that's the theological virtue. But we got to understand, philanthropy is not just something that rich people do. It's actually an expression of the second part of the commandment to love your neighbor as yourself. Philanthropy, the love of man. It's not humanitarianism because, as Michael said, that's sort of the wrong way. But I think we can have a Christian form of philanthropy, which is the love of our fellow men. We often celebrate a particular type of philanthropy, the donation of time, energy, and money to nonprofit activity. But the fact is, any activity that has as its root the love of others, whether it's creating a good product in a business, sacrificing for one's children, taking care of a sick parent, or running for public office, can be philanthropic in its intent. And for that matter, no matter what the outward appearance of a particular endeavor might be, you could donate $1 billion to the Red Cross. If it's motivated by something other than love of others, like PR for the corporation, okay, it's motivated by something other than philanthropy or love. It's not truly philanthropy. It's not a bad thing, but it's not philanthropy. And sometimes it's a clanging gong. Now, I also said being philanthropic is the only way we can be happy. So I want to dive into what I mean by the word happy. I think first that truth is better than untruth. Now that sounds like something that doesn't need to be said, but in today's world, I think it's one of the most important things that we must say. Truth is better than untruth. I love the truth. One of my heroes, St. John Paul II, wrote a wonderful essay, encyclical, called Veritatis Splendor, the splendor of truth. What a wonderful phrase. Truth does indeed have splendor. Truth is the bottom line of philosophy. So that's the first premise. Premise 2, truth can't be negated. It's there whether you want to acknowledge it or not. Premise 3, truth and all the good things of this earth are gifts. None of us earns the truth. When we figure out how an engine works, or a new cancer drug, or how to teach children more effectively, we may have worked hard to find the truth, but the truth itself is a gift. In fact, the more I look at the world, I think the entire economy of the world is an economy of the gift. None of us earned our birth, or our parents, or our intellects, or our sensitivities, or our talents, or our spouses, or our children, or the air we breathe, or the harmony we hear with our ears, or the sunsets that we see. They're all gifts. And so premise number 4 is, if truth exists, and it can't be negated, and if the economy of this world is one of the gift, then the only way we can be fully human, fully what we're intended to be, is in being consistent with this order within the universe. In other words, philanthropy, the giving of a gift, the giving of ourselves, allows us to become what we're designed and supposed to become, fully human. And I think that's the only way we can be truly happy. The happiest people I know understand that, either consciously or unconsciously. They understand it. I think that's the economy of the gift that governs the universe. Now, why is this so hard for us to accept? Well, like it or not, as I indicated earlier, we've to one degree or another become materialist. And I think the world is a bit of a constant battle, and this is brought up in the way Michael was talking about caritas as we go out to the third world. I think the world's in a constant battle between a materialist view and a transcendent view. And the materialist view, because of the culture in which we live, is the easier one to have as a default position. And so we live in an illusory world that denies the transcendent rather than make the sacrifices to understand it. And I think that the truth, reality, is in the economy of the gift. Michael mentioned Pieper and his notion of prudence as being seeing things as they really are. The slogan of our business, Hanna Capital, is measured by reality. We want to have our eyes wide open, see things as they are. Interestingly enough, with this materialist view, I think that we're actually moving to a post-material world. Now, I don't mean by that everything's going to be virtual. But I do think we're realizing that our biggest problems in the future are not problems of material scarcity, but rather are problems of the human heart and of human relationships with one another. And I include our political order in that category. In this country, 99% of the children in our government schools have enough food to eat, and a roof over their heads, and clothes on their back. For thousands of years of human civilization, that wasn't the case, but it is today. Their bellies are full, their coats are heavy, they have air conditioning and color TV. Yet, close to half of them do not have their 2 biological parents living with them. That is not a challenge of material scarcity. It is a challenge of the human heart and how it ought to be formed and ordered with other human hearts. I think we need to recognize that the core of the problems of our society is a misunderstanding of the truth about the human person. If we get that wrong, every policy we prescribe, as Michael showed in the various examples, if we get that truth wrong, every policy we prescribe is wrong. Now, the leading business people of today are actually showing the world how to live with post-materialism. That's how they're building their companies. They're not focused on amassing land or factories, but intellectual property, which is intangible. And so when it comes to our giving, I think we want to start thinking in a post-material way. I know of someone who gave an investment hint in this regard, and I view philanthropy as an investment. I'm investing in someone or something, and for that matter, I see love as something of an investment. It's a sacrifice we make for others. Anyway, I know of someone who gave an investment hint in this regard a few years ago. At the time, he was Cardinal Ratzinger, and he said this in his last homily before he became Pope Benedict. I think this is worth keeping in mind as we look at how we ought to use our money. He said, of all the things on this earth, buildings, mountains, rivers, art, of all the things on the earth, the only one that is eternal is the human soul. Now think about that. If eternity exists, it's a big if. We can't prove it. I believe it, but we can't prove it. But if it does, by far the greatest investment, I'm an investment guy, by far the greatest investment that I can make in reality is an investment in a human soul, my own and the souls of others. Yeah, we all know, anybody in business knows that if you have an investment that pays dividends for a longer period of time, it's a much better investment than an investment that pays dividends for a short period of time. So we need to also understand that if we invest in the salvation of souls, the return on the investment goes on forever because the soul lives forever. When it comes to my stewardship of my money, that's what I've sought to invest in. Sometimes well, sometimes not so well. You don't hit a home run on every investment. But like any good investors, we can have some guidelines. And so here are some suggestions I want to give to you. And by the way, I hear this is a little bit of a cliche among some people who, again, this is a high-class problem, but some people make money and they start to try to give it away. And I've heard them say, you know, wow, it's tougher to give it away than it was to make it. And I politely tell them that that's not true at all, but I do it in more graphic terms. What they really mean is this. It was really hard to make it. I worked 70 hours a week for 30 years making it, and now I want to give it away, and I don't want to work near that hard. I'm hoping that my good intentions alone will get me enough credit up there and down here that I don't have to work at it very hard. It's hard to give it away well. If you just throw money at people, as Michael said, that doesn't really work very well. But it's not impossible to do, and it doesn't take 70 hours a week. I do think it takes deliberation. It certainly takes prayer, and then it needs the use of our reason and our deliberation. The first guideline we should ask ourselves whenever we're donating money to someone is, have we concluded that what they're involved is the truth and that it's something, are we donating to something that favors the transcendent rather than the material view of life? If you have a choice between two similar causes, but one is faith-based and the other is not, go with the one that believes in God. The next suggestion is to ask, are you in philosophical agreement with the tenets or the beliefs of the organization that you're funding? I'm amazed at the number of things that are funded where the donor doesn't know what the actual mission and beliefs of the organization is that they're sending the money to. Third, is the effort itself designed to use leverage of other money or other efforts? Archimedes said that with the proper leverage, any weight in the world, you can move the earth. Fourth, do we have a chance of reaching, when we're giving our money or our time and energy, do we have a chance of reaching a tipping point where our contribution of time, money, or effort leads to the marginal difference in the success of a particular endeavor? These are things I would suggest you be on the lookout for. Fifth, are we using, and this is kind of related, what I like to call my principle of indispensability. Now, I used to love the saying years ago that I would hear in business, and the saying was, the graveyards are full of indispensable people, meaning nobody's really indispensable, okay? If they leave to go to another job, we'll find somebody else. And I used to kind of, I'm not proud of it, but I used to kind of think, yeah, the graveyards are full of indispensable people. But I don't believe that anymore. I actually now believe that every single person is indispensable. Now, if that's right, if there's an essential human dignity and an indispensability to every single person, then part of what I try to do with my life is discern that for which I am indispensable. To ask myself, am I indispensable to this activity? Will it not happen but for my involvement? I challenge you to think about the question, for what am I indispensable? Now, we may think, well, there's nothing where I'm truly indispensable, but that wouldn't be correct. There's several jobs for which there's no one else on the planet who can do near as good a job as I can. You may think that sounds arrogant, but I'll tell you, no one else on the planet can be near as good a husband to my wife as I can. No one. No one on the planet can be near as good a father to my daughter, a son to my parents, a brother to my brother and sister, or for that matter, a steward of my own talents. There is no one I can find on the planet that I could delegate that to, and they would do as good a job as I would. Along those same lines, I'll tell you this, if someone else or some other group is performing essentially the same task that I am, with at least pretty good effectiveness, keeping in mind the rule of indispensability, maybe I should let them do it rather than me. I once had a spiritual director who told me, because I was thinking about doing something, but there was somebody else thinking about doing it too. He said, Frank, don't take away someone else's chance to be holy. Am I indispensable to it? The cool thing in philanthropy and stewardship is that if someone else comes along and does it better than you, great. Move on to something else. Those things for which we're indispensable may not be as popular as other causes. And we have to be courageous enough not to let this trouble us. We shouldn't seek the world's approval for these things. If it comes, fine. But the world often usually praises, those things that are conventional and unthreatening. Sixth, I think we should ask whether we bring any specific knowledge, expertise, or ability to the thing we might be contributing money to. When I invest money in a business, I know money's just a commodity. The only way I can get a better than market rate return on the money I invest is if I'm bringing something else to the table, some kind of extra knowledge or effort where I can create additional value for the enterprise, above and beyond what's already there. The word's overused, but the word I'm looking for is I'm seeking synergy. So we should be on the lookout when we're giving money away for opportunities to create value with our heart and our talent when we donate money to something. Seventh, we should determine whether we're violating the principle of subsidiarity. Michael touched on this, which is a church teaching that says that all social action should take place at the lowest level of society as possible. In other words, it's better to have parents raise their children rather than have the state take over the job. Often in well-meaning philanthropy, we end up fostering dependency, and that violates the rule of subsidiarity. One additional thing to consider, I think we business people will actually be happiest when we're being good stewards, because that's what we're made to do. We're happiest, we're most in our zones when we're doing that for which God made us. There's nothing more satisfying in the world than to do that which we are certain we were put on this earth to do. There are two types of pleasures we might have, and both are great. The earthly animal pleasures, a good meal, a fine wine, a cool breeze, a warm shower, the sun on our face, I could go on and on. But the better pleasures are the divine pleasures. Those times we get to imitate God. These two types of pleasures are what make men happy, but we all know the earthly pleasures are temporary. Conversely, the divine pleasures are not bound up by time. When one day we are hopefully immortal, actually I say that, we're actually already immortal. When one day we're hopefully immortal in paradise, we'll do what God does, which is delight in the world and create anew. So I think we don't need to wait for heaven to delight in the world and create anew. I think that's what we should try to do while on earth and what will bring happiness. That may sound really bold, but I honestly, you know, the poor little nun who went to India and opened clinics and orphanages, Mother Teresa, Saint Teresa, didn't have all these worldly talents. But she decided, I'm not going to wait for heaven to delight in the world and create anew. For us, creating anew means sacrifice, which is the key ingredient of love. That's how being a steward can make us happy. The greatest pleasure, the way to derive that which is most pleasing, is to add value to others. I know it's an economic term, but it's a human reality. The Greeks knew, even before Jesus, the Greeks knew men want to be like gods. We do. So how do we do that? By giving like God. I spoke earlier today about the communion that we form with one another. Ladies and gentlemen, as we spend time together today, let's think about how we can encourage others to form full and true communions with God and with one another, and how we might cultivate those communions within our church and our society. Let's think about how our stewardship might be more specifically oriented toward that. I took a tour of the Catholic high school this morning with some of the folks who are in here, and that's a deliberate effort to follow these kinds of principles. These communions, they're the transformative agent in our society. It's not a political movement. That's not what moves. If you study history, that's not what moves the world, is some political thing. It wasn't Constantine. Constantine signed his famous edict around the year 300 saying the Roman Empire is now Christian. Constantine didn't convert Rome. It was fervent Christians in communities in Rome that converted Rome. And Constantine, being a good politician, could see which way the wind was blowing and said, I hereby decree. But that horse had already left the barn. Holy communions change the world. That is what we're supposed to do with our money and our stewardship. That's why God gave us stewardship over our gifts. To first be in communion with Him and then with others through Him. And we ought to use our money to do it. Oddly enough, we have money in order to grow closer to God. From time immemorial, since Adam and Eve, men have been trying to figure out how to be like gods. They've wanted to answer the call to heroism that they feel within themselves. Well, we can't be gods, but we can be like God. We can give like God. We can give everything we have, of our treasure, of our hearts, of our lives. Being generous is how we can be like God and be happy. My friends, the true nature of wealth is that state in which God's bounty flows into and through us. He gave us our wealth to be like Him with a magnanimous heart. That magnanimity, greatness of soul. Let us all pray today for that magnanimity, that greatness of soul. That's the end objective of all the money we have. Thank you again for your kind attention. By the way, I think they've ordered some of the books out there, but I hope you all buy the money book, but there's another book that I just wrote that's intended for people in their late teens or 20s, and it can be read in an hour. And it touches on some of these principles, and so you might enjoy it, but enough of the commercial. Oh, no, one more commercial before I leave. Michael Miller works with the Acton Institute. For those of you who are looking at helping the poor in a systematic, thoughtful, prayerful way, the Acton Institute just does tremendous good. So I want to say a good word for them. But again, thank you for having me with you. God bless you. Thanks.